Foreign Policy magazine just published a new article entitled "The Next Israel-Iran War is Coming." The article gives a forecast of what the factors are pointing to a resumption of the conflict between Israel and Iran that broke out earlier this summer. What the article suggests is that the underlying political disputes between Israel and Iran are far from settled. Israel's real goal is not just about stopping Iran's nuclear program, or not even primarily about that, but it's actually about changing the dynamic between itself and Iran to give itself full freedom of access in the future to attack Iran, to bomb its territory, to kill its leaders and assassinate its nuclear scientists without the ability for Iran to respond. From the Iranian perspective, this is unacceptable, and Iran is preparing to reset the deterrence equation between itself and Israel. During the war, Iran fired hundreds of ballistic missiles at Israel, but it has yet to implement what it sees as a full mode of deterrence on Israel to stop it from carrying out more attacks against its territory in the future. From Iran's perspective, there is significant motivation to restart the war. Despite the losses that they took, they need to send a message to Israel that they cannot attack them again in the future, and that the new normal, where Israel treats Iran in the way it does Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and other countries, cannot be enacted on Iran's own territory. Iran has a significant ballistic missile arsenal still, and has reportedly been taking assistance from China and other countries to rebuild their capacities to hit Israel in the future. From Israel's perspective, they depleted a lot of their very expensive missile defenses during the first war with Iran. And while they can count on the support of Donald Trump at the moment, it's questionable the extent to which Trump may want to engage in a much larger war with Iran. Because make no mistake, if the war does break out again, it's likely much more bloody and messy than it was the first time. Iran has considerable capacity to hit targets in the Persian Gulf, and were the U.S. to become heavily involved, it's quite likely that the U.S. would be stuck in an extended conflict with a very large country that does involve some level of American casualties, which we did not see in the first conflict. So, if an Israel-Iran war does break out, it will likely be far more costly for all sides. But from the Iranian perspective, it may be necessary to hit harder, even at the extent, even at the cost of taking more losses, to send a message that such wars cannot happen in the future from Israel's perspective. I think that a war is not certain, but there's significant motivations to start one again. From the Israeli perspective, they did not achieve their goal in the war with Iran, actually. While they hit Iran's nuclear facilities, they did not destroy them by any means, or did not destroy Iran's nuclear program as a whole, but also they attempted to target Iran's senior leadership, and they failed at killing them. So they didn't topple the Iranian regime. It's still there. They may have put into place a new dynamic where they can hit Iran to a degree they couldn't in the future. But the Iranians did retaliate to the last moments of the war. They kept firing ballistic missiles until the ceasefire came into effect. So clearly, their deterrent capacity was not destroyed by the conflict. Now, Iran is in a position where it's vengeful, has a capacity and a desire to fire more missiles at Israel and to hit Israel in other means. And they've created a dynamic where the ruling elite feels that Israel is an existential threat to it. So I actually think that the significant motivation from Iran's perspective to have a war. They held back quite a bit in this conflict because they were girding themselves for a conflict that they were expected to happen in the future with itself and also with Israel, but also with the United States potentially. Iran has two options. It could restart a war with Israel, or it could reestablish deterrence with a nuclear option by doing a nuclear test sometime in the near future. They need to change the deterrence equation, though. They cannot leave the situation such that Israel feels that or can project that it has the ability to fly over Iran, hit Iran at will. That needs to change. What the United States does or does not do in the situation is probably an X factor. The U.S. is managing quite a bit at the moment in Ukraine and Russia. Has an ongoing rivalry with China, which is going to drain more and more resources in the years to come. The question is whether Trump is willing or able to be dragged into a conflict with Iran by Israel, which would be much, much more taxing and much more costly than what we've seen today. So I actually think that from Iran's perspective, as a larger country, there's quite some motivation to fight a war of attrition with Israel, which did, despite its framing otherwise, suffer quite a bit in terms economically and otherwise as a result, even the short, limited conflict with Iran. Samad, what do you think about this?
My opinion is that it's very unlikely that a war will restart in the near future, and I'll take this from the Iranian perspective quickly, but mostly from the Israeli perspective. From the Iranian perspective, like you have to look at in war, the timing is really important. Who launched the war? It was Israel who launched the war, which means that it was advantageous for them now, or like in the future, it'll be less advantageous, which infers that in the future it'll be more advantageous for Iran to launch a war. So Iran would want to bide its time. Iran had initiative at the 12-day war, and it agreed to a ceasefire, which by all accounts the Israeli side requested. And the reason is Israel depends on a lot of its power, from support from the West, and by far and away this is dwindled more than ever. As well as like Iran has an interest to rebuild its like so-called axis of resistance, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and even in Iraq. And even stuff like Iraq's buying advanced South Korean anti-air defense systems, which when they arrive and they're set up, it will shut Iraqi airspace to Israeli jets, which would significantly inhibit Israeli jets from launching. So, from Iran's perspective, they will always bide their time, and they'll continue to bide their time, even if there are like momentary advantages. But from Israel's perspective, it's like a bit more multifaceted, and I'll go into them as quickly as possible. The first thing is, there's an article today by Bloomberg that showed Israel's economy contracted by 3.5% because of the Iran war. It was expected to grow 0.2%, so that's a 3.7% difference, and that was only a 12-day war. And this was when Iran was caught by surprise and it didn't know how to react. And an army takes a few weeks to actually respond. Iran obviously had contingencies in place, but it didn't have an offensive plan. So if Israel actually wants to launch a war, the cost for Israel is going to be huge, like significantly bigger than what it was. So what do they have to gain that they couldn't have gained in the 12 days? Like they have to scale to a position that's incredibly significant, whether they destroy Iran's full oil facilities or, really, really destroy Tehran or potentially even launch a nuclear weapon or a tactical nuclear weapon to bring Iran to its knees. Like we're talking about escalations that are pretty significant on a global scale. And they impact Israel's other partners like the US, where Trump's battling inflation at a high level. He wants to win these trade wars. And again, the Israeli side will want to bring in the US side. And they want the US to be involved way more than they were last time. Last time, Trump didn't want to get involved. And, he saw a quick opportunity. They told him just bomb once and leave. He did that. He took it and he left. But do we want like would Trump put aside all his whole agenda just for this actual war where the outcome is uncertain? And history of American involvement in the Middle East has all been negative. I think that's all very unlikely to happen. And then two other things quickly, which is Israel's used up and America's used up a significant portion of their anti missile stock. This is something that will take years to replenish, and if not, they're gonna, especially American THAADs, they're gonna use it to the point where it impacts their nuclear deterrence or impacts their ability to act against China and Russia in the near future. So you're talking about again something that's going to be significant cost to the US military, to the US side. And if the US does get involved, we're talking about US military deaths. And with Israel being incredibly unpopular and Trump reaching new levels of unpopularity, like, is that something that can be justified? I think that's all very unlikely. And then the reason why, this is the last point I'm making, the reason why I think there's all this talk about a new war happening is despair. Israel's strategy right now is to make Iranian society despair about their situation. They're trying to spread negative news. They're trying to make them negative about the economy, about this, about sanctions, about their lives, about another war. They want it to loom over their heads. And they want to break Iranian society the same way they broke, other societies in the Middle East. And that's kind of what they're doing. That's why Netanyahu's coming out there and saying these big speeches. That's why, like the Mossad linked Iran International, like every article they write is incredibly negative, as though like there isn't any positive stuff that happens in Iran. So I think a lot of this is chatter to keep Iran under this war umbrella. And break the people's will or break the people's ability to support the government from those who do, of course. So that's why I think it's pretty unlikely to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what the Israelis would prefer is that the Iranians fight each other, and the Iranian society just kind of collapses in internal conflicts, civil conflict, and so forth. That's preferable. They don't really have the will or capacity to engage in a larger war. I don't think that they have much motivation at all. They really need to fight sharp, small wars as opposed to long wars of attrition, which are not really built for a small country to withstand. And also with the U.S. issue, I think that this is a real test because you're right. Everything you're saying is correct. It's not in America's interest at all. It's not in Trump's interest at all to fight such a war in the Middle East. He campaigned so strongly against these kind of wars. But it's the test of the lobbying apparatus in the United States, of people who are very invested in this, who are interested in getting Israel every single thing it wants. Trump has shown he is capable of saying no to those people, but can he say no to them in a sustained manner for a very, very long time? That's an interesting question. That's something which will be the test of this at the moment. Because if Israel finds it needs more from the U.S. vis-a-vis Iran, I'm not saying that necessarily will engage in direct confrontation, but if it needs some support beyond what's really in America's interest, we'll see how far they can push to get it when they have a very relatively amenable administration in power at the moment.
It's weird because like fundamentally, I don't think Trump can stomach U.S. military deaths, and the US can't fight a war in the Middle East without that risk. Like previous wars that the US fought in the Middle East, they fought against armies that were conventionally set up. And in a conventional army, I'm talking about like both Saddam's armies, the Taliban, though they weren't conventional, but they were not set up to fight the US. But from the Iran's perspective, like any close military engagement with Iran will have like drone swarms and low cost, high accurate cruise missiles, and it'll quickly drain out U.S. resources to actually defend. So we'll be looking at U.S. military depths and significant U.S. military depths if they keep it present in the region.
Yes.
So I don't think the US will stomach that. Not now. Not when like the tariffs is going on, inflation's on the rise, all your prices are going to spike and hit inflation even more. US debt is higher than it's ever been. I think it passed 37 trillion. They fundamentally have bigger fish to fry. This isn't like the last time the US got involved. It took a major event on US soil, 9/11, for them to justify it. And even if a 9/11 happens again now, like fighting a country like Iran with all its allies, non-state allies in the region, it's just a different beast.
No, I agree. I agree. It would be Iran. Also, Iran is like three times the size of Iraq. Significant
And
magnitude,
mountainous.
mountainous, and it has this network of supporters and sympathizers throughout the region and the world. It's not as isolated as people make it out to be, actually.
And then
So
there are a significant population of Iranians who will actually die, who are
yes,
willing to die for this. When no Iraqis were willing to die for Saddam,
yes,
and that's critical.
yeah, that is critical. So we'll wait to see what happens between Iran, Israel, and the United States. At the moment, tremendous uncertainty does reign, but significant factors seem to point to either a resumption of conflict or a return to detente, with both sides licking their wounds and preparing for the next round.